Hi, this is the.
Hello.
What we're doing here is something a little bit different. We received some fantastic feedback, and we're always looking for feedback. We love to hear from listeners, and we were advised to maybe release things on a little bit more of a regular basis. And so, as a test for that kind of thing, what we're going to do is have a mini series, three different podcasts, where we cover some speculation related to some upcoming Apple products, specifically the increase in their display resolution that we predict. So we're going to be covering the MacBook Pro, specifically the 15-inch class MacBook Pro, and how it's likely to be replaced by a 16-inch MacBook Pro. We're going to be covering the iPad and with kind of a 10.2-inch display iPad and how that fits into the existing lineup, and then also covering some rumors related to a new external display at or around 31.6 inches in diagonal length. We're going to be targeting a release in early Monday over the next few weeks, and we look forward to feedback on this test of a new, more regular format. Now, as we talk through this series, we're going to be talking a lot on points and pixels. And so what I wanted to do was stop for just a moment and go over that concept. That concept comes from when Apple brought on the Retina displays back, that started in the iPhone, and it has covered the rest of the market. And what happens with these high DPI displays is that what is previously only 1 pixel on our display now can become several, usually four. So you'll have a grid of 4 pixels, physical pixels, that are now representing one logical pixel. And by logical pixel, I mean a pixel from a UI perspective. So when your buttons and your images and all of the stuff on your UI is concerned, they're worried about these logical elements that are represented by potentially more than one actual physical pixel. So to describe those, we're going to use the term point. And for non-high DPI displays, a more traditional regular DPI display, there are exactly the same number of points as there are pixels. For a pretty typical high DPI display that has a clean pixel doubling in either dimension, there will be 4 times as many pixels as there are points, uh, double each dimension. And so we're going to be talking about points and pixels quite a bit through here, and we hope that helps limit any potential confusion related to that topic. So I think we can move on and start talking a little bit about the rumors related to this new MacBook Pro and where they came from and how that kind of shapes our analysis. I'm Mathematician. Why don't you get us started?
In February, the analyst Ming-Chi Kuo released a big report about many of Apple's 2019 products. In this report, the iPhone, iPad, Mac, Apple Watch, we will just be talking about the 16 to 16.5-inch MacBook Pro. If this rumor is true, then the display size is going to increase from its predecessor, the 15.4-inch MacBook Pro. And in recent years, some of Apple's products have been getting more high-end, with prices increasing, and larger displays are one way to justify this premium. This table shows some Retina MacBooks and iMacs and their display resolutions. In the first row, there is the physical display resolution, and then in the rows below that are the various scaled resolutions available through Apple software. The row labeled System Default is the default resolution for each device, as shown in Apple's settings. Entries in light orange are resolutions where the physical resolution is an exact integer multiple of the scaled resolution. For example, for the 15-inch MacBook Pro, 1440 by 900 scaled resolution, when you double that due to the pixel doubling, you get 2880 by 1800, which is exactly the same as the physical resolution of the 15-inch MacBook Pro.
One thing we can mention a little bit that might be helpful to any listeners that aren't as familiar with how Mac OS operates high DPI displays is that in general, behind the scenes, Mac OS is always rendering the desktop and everything at a doubled resolution, right? So if you want 1440 by 900, it's always going to be doing that at 2880 by 1800, doubled in either dimension, regardless of what that physical display can handle. Once it has that doubled image, it either upscales it or downscales it or doesn't scale it at all to the physical display. So sometimes we're used to this idea on Windows where we've kind of got a particular resolution, a 4K display only 27 inch or 28 inches at the diagonal, and that that would make everything way too small. That's not really what we're talking about here. So you can have a 15-inch MacBook Pro that's got what's effectively a 1920 by 1200 display that has usable space, but what it's actually doing is rendering in the background something at more like 3840 by 2400, and then it's downscaling that to whatever the 15-inch MacBook Pro's physical display is, be it 2880 by 1800 or hypothetically something else. So I think that's an important thing to mention with how this works. It might not be this table might not be as familiar to users of Windows
or Linux.
I think that's great. We kind of went into the weeds on the current status quo, but what's really cool from a strategic kind of speculation perspective is to look backwards and see where have we come from. And the graph that you put together, iMathematician, is pretty fantastic, where we're looking at over 2 decades of information on Mac laptops and their screens and their highest scaled resolution. Starting back in the late 90s when PowerBooks that had relatively low-res displays drive all the way up to modern MacBook Pros. And we've got all the details there, but what's pretty clear when you step back is, and just look at the shape of the graph, is that there's a pretty clear trend up to the mid to late 2000s of increasing that top end usable space, number of points in that highest display resolution up to somewhere around 2008, and then that really peters off and remains static really till the present. We've had some differences during that time, about halfway through that point, somewhere around 2012, 2013, we saw the introduction of the Retina MacBook Pros, and that also brought the end of the 17-inch MacBook Pro. So we actually got the same usable space, equivalent to a 1920 by 1200 display, but we got that on a denser screen, a smaller 15-inch screen. And so that's one thing to mention, is that this trend is not an artifact of increases in size. Yes, we started down at 12 or 13 inches and eventually got to 17 inches, but we've had density increases throughout the entire period of time. And so that kind of bleeds into what we're going to be talking about next, where we've had a flat trend and we expect some kind of blip in the positive direction. And it certainly could be a denser screen, but then it also could be a slightly larger screen than what's currently found in the largest MacBook Pro. So iMathematician, why don't you talk us through a little bit more of kind of our reasoning behind the case for a higher PPI in MacBook Pros?
So there's some good reasons to have a higher PPI in the MacBook Pro display. The default resolutions of the 12-inch MacBook, 13-inch MacBook Pro, and 15-inch MacBook Pro are mismatched with the physical display resolutions. For example, the 15-inch MacBook Pro has a 2880 by 1800 physical resolution, but the default resolution is a 1680 by 1050 with retina scaling of 2x, which means the computer renders the desktop at 3360 by 2100 and then scales it down to 2880 by 1800. Instead of downscaling the default resolution, it would be a good idea to increase the physical resolution to something that would match the default resolution of the MacBook Pro. One person who has mentioned that is Marco Arment, who is a podcaster and programmer well known in the Apple community. He has advocated for this rumored 16 to 16.5 inch MacBook Pro to have a higher pixel density to match the default scaled resolution. In particular, a physical resolution of 3600 by 2250 and a display size of 16.5 inches would give the same PPI as the current default scaled resolution for the 15-inch MacBook Pro. So increased resolution, but the interface elements will have the same size as before.
So to recap a little bit of what you're saying, at least so far, and we haven't. Eventually, we'll probably get to a little bit more on a slight size increase on the physical display dimensions. But so far, you're just talking about saying, hey, previously when we talked about how macOS does scaling, if we want a ton of space on our display, behind the scenes, macOS is putting together this pretty big image, and then we're downscaling that to fit onto the lower resolution, or still high resolution, but lower resolution display, and we're technically losing information, losing some visual detail in the process. To start, you're kind of saying, hey, maybe it makes sense just to increase the density of the display to the point where that doesn't really have to happen anymore. Where there doesn't need to be any kind of downscaling.
So Ming-Chi Kuo noted that the MacBook would go to a 16 to 16.5 inch screen size, and Apple's not one to drop an old product and create a new one in a larger body. So I think everyone probably thinks that it'll be the same size enclosure as the 15.4 inch MacBook. So what that means is it would probably have smaller bezels. Now, or maybe it's a little wider, but the same height, or maybe it's the same width, but it's taller. But what we're really not sure of is what that aspect ratio that it's going to have is. There's quite a large variety of possibilities, as you can see on this chart. And this chart has a lot going on, so I think we're going to back up and explain exactly what is going on here. So you can see this region is basically the maximum scaled resolution that's available on the MacBook Pro 15.4 inch, doubled, and then looking at what would it be like if there is, so 3840 by 2400 is that maximum scaled resolution. 15.95 inch that you can see is the lower bound, and 16.55 inch is the upper bound. And then we use the PPI of the 12-inch MacBook and the PPI of the 13-inch MacBook is sort of our upper and lower bounds for that PPI, the physical PPI on that display. So getting back to this chart that has a lot going on, right now the 15.4-inch MacBook with its maximum scaled resolution 3840 by 2400 is in that bottom left quadrant. And then we have lines going across diagonally, 4 by 3, 3 by 2, 16 by 10, 16 by 9, which state what the various, this quadrant has the various possible resolutions, and those lines intersect with potential resolutions that are in that area that have the proper PPI for 16 to 16.5 inch displays. So the blue circles are some of the ideas that we have, and this is obviously not exhaustive. Our entire realm of possibilities is that purple area. If we move on to this next chart, we have the purple on the top right, which is that maximum scaled resolution doubled, and then we have that blue area, which is the standard scaled resolution doubled, and then the green area is the physical display resolution, again, doubled. So these are our various possibilities for that graph, and we believe that it's going to fall within there somewhere. And, the most conservative guess would say that they're just going to stick with 16 by 10. It's what people love about MacBooks. Some of us, myself, think that they'll move more towards a 3 by 2 aspect ratio for more productivity. Do you guys have any other opinions on that?
Well, one thing that I'm always interested in is what's kind of off the shelf and what would be cheapest, and that's more often than not going to be something 16 by 9. However, what we've seen recently in a lot of these premium mobile devices is they end up getting some display that is kind of a one-off custom deal. And I think once you go custom, you probably want to be a little bit special. And so 16 by 9 might not be what Apple is interested in. So, they might stick with 16 by 10. They might go to 3.2. I don't expect them to go to 4.3, but probably 3 by 2 or 16 by 10 would, or who knows, maybe something else entirely. Again, emphasizing the custom nature of this. This is Apple, remember, so there's always that element of surprise, and that's actually why we have a region here. We have a shaded set of possible resolution dimension pairs, not some kind of one figure. So somewhere in there's quite a few different aspect ratios, and Lord knows Apple very well might pick one that we haven't recognized.
I completely agree. So it's Apple. They're going to make a custom display, and they're high volume enough that it doesn't matter. And then the other thing is, if you look at the most premium Windows laptops, such as the Surfaces, those are 3 by 2. There's no way they're going to say, everyone who cares about productivity, get away from Macs. They've sort of been saying that kind of thing for a while, but they're not going to push them completely away and just move to 16 by 9 and please all the video watchers, right? They're going to go with something that's all about productivity.
Do you think there's a lot of video watchers out there? I feel like the pros are probably the ones that care.
For the 13-inch, for sure. For the 12-inch, for sure. But for the
the 12-inch isn't really a pro thing. I think we're probably talking just about the two MacBook Pros, and in particular the larger one is the more professional of the two.
I don't really think there's anyone who buys the 50. I mean, there's obviously going to be some kids, some trust fund babies that buy the 15-inch, 15.4-inch MacBook Pro for just, general web browsing and video watching. But I think this is a pro device. Maybe the 13-inch isn't as much, but the 16 to 16.5-inch theoretical MacBook Pro, that slots in, at the $2,000 plus price range is not the video watching web browsing machine.
Yeah, I think Apple's recent shift from using LPDDR3 in the 15-inch MacBook Pro, and also all of Apple's laptops, to using DDR4 in the 2018 15-inch MacBook Pro. I think that's one sign that Apple is treating the 15-inch as a professional product for high-performance users who value more RAM over standby battery life. And I expect this to continue, this kind of trade-off to continue with the 16 to 16.5-inch MacBook Pro. So I have a question, by the way. Do you guys expect, assuming, so if the 16-inch rumor is true, do you expect the 15-inch to stick around for more than like a year? And a related question, do you expect the 13-inch MacBook Pro to go to about 14 inches? So increasing a little bit.
I think on your first question, for sure, I think they'll make that 16 to 16.5 inch MacBook, 2000 plus, and then that 15.4 inch MacBook Pro will be, the $1,500 to $2,000 range. As far as the 13 inch MacBook, I have no idea.
Dylan, that's an interesting thought. I think I would agree that the 15-inch device will stick around for a while, but I think it's more of the classic Apple keeping the device around until no one cares about it anymore, and then killing it off. And they've done that countless times in recent history. And but I don't know if I'm not sure if I see the 15-inch device getting quite that cheap. I mean, I'm sure that
it starts at 2,400, so that'd be a pretty big.
Okay, so let me adjust those numbers to 24. Let me adjust those numbers to 2,000 to 2,500, or 2,000, 750, and then the 16-inch, $3,000 plus.
Those seem like reasonable numbers.
I didn't realize quite how expensive these were.
To be clear, when we say that the 15-inch would be kind of quasi-retired, but generally what happens is they only keep around the lowest tier device with relatively few, if any, upgrade possibilities, and then they're not really going to be putting in latest chips and other things in it, and not really dumping any more R&D into it. And then the higher end options are going to require that you get the more expensive device. That way they don't cannibalize themselves. They don't let you get certain high-end features, the latest processors, the most RAM, other things like that, the most storage with a slightly cheaper chassis. They make you spend a little bit more to get those things, and Lord knows that business model has been pretty successful for them. And if they can do anything to justify an increase in price, I certainly think they will. I mean, that was one of the things that kind of underpinned this whole speculation, is how does Apple justify increasing their price, because they desperately need to maintain their margins in a market that is increasingly competitive and increasingly tight on margins. And this screen is one of probably many ways that they'll approach that problem. Now, we kind of showed you guys the region of our most likely candidates for the screen on this new MacBook. However, I think we've got kind of our favorite. And so iMathematician, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of our favorite choice for what this might look like, and how that stacks up against the current iteration, as well as some other speculation from the community?
For this speculation, I actually didn't think of these particular resolutions from looking at the graph, but I did kind of check them with the graph. I made sure that the points ended up in the regions, which they do. so everything works out.
Right, and that's really all that counts here is that you just want to say, hey, I've got some piece of speculation, and it really just needs to fit in this kind of region and follow the rules that you kind of set forth to create that region in the first place. So it's really just got to fit in there.
I'm not so much predicting this resolution as I am giving this resolution as an example of what Apple can do. So first of all, I kept the aspect ratio at 16:10. It may not be true, just something I'm keeping on the safe side. The second thing is the maximum scaled resolution is 2048 by 1280. This resolution is similar to the default resolution of the 21.5-inch iMac, except that for the MacBook Pro, it's a little bit taller due to the difference in aspect ratios. The third thing is I have to admit I'm a bit of a pessimist regarding the physical display resolution. And as a result, I only assume that the 16-inch MacBook Pro has the same 220 ppi physical display as the 15-inch MacBook Pro. And for that ppi, one resolution that works is 3008 by 1880 pixels, which is similar to a scaled resolution for one of those 27-inch external displays. And with this resolution in PPI, the scaled resolution of 2048 by 1280 becomes 300 PPI. This is a little bit of an issue because it's a little bit higher than the maximum scaled resolutions of any of the MacBooks, but it's only by 1% compared to the 13-inch MacBook Pro, so it might not be the end of the world. Marco Arment's speculation of a 3600 by 2250 physical display, so his speculation ends up with a slightly larger display than my speculation, so 16.5 inches instead of 16.1 inches. And the 257 ppi for the physical display is exactly the same as the default scaled resolution of the current 15-inch MacBook Pro. However, since the display is speculated to be larger, you get a higher resolution.
Yeah, so it seems like Marco is being a little bit more optimistic, and iMathematician, it might be fair to say you're being slightly more pessimistic, but you're both in that range of, 16 inches, either on the low side or the high side, and either starting at the existing PPI or dialing it up a little bit to see a denser screen. So it feels like it's a safe bet to suggest that somewhere between those two is going to be what the MacBook Pro is going to look like. So, when we get back to that chart that we looked at before, looking at this new speculation from iMathematician, it mostly just dials up the screen size, kind of holds that PPI, that density, roughly constant, and gets us that uptick in maximum usable space that we haven't seen in basically a decade from the MacBook Pro lineup. So, as far as key takeaways, that's going to be a meaningful feature for a lot of users of these in this Pro area for the MacBook Pro, and I think that's going to help Apple move some units and keep that average selling price on the MacBook Pro as high as possible.
Let's end this podcast in a little special of a way by doing a baseless speculation that we don't even expand on, and that's me saying that this is going to be OLED. What about you guys?
Oh man, whew, I think that's a bridge.
$4,000 then?
I think that's a bridge too far to say OLED, but we'll see. We'll see. I would love to see Apple put OLED in a professional device where you've got professionals using their professional stuff.
Hey, no expanding.
No expanding. No talking about all of the disadvantages of OLED. Oh boy, that successful touch bar. Okay, Well, in the spirit of not expanding anything, I think what we'll do is end the podcast, and we appreciate everyone listening today. Thank you, guys.